I didn't want to be rich. I didn't want to be famous. I wanted something much more specific, much more personal, and much more dangerous than either of those things. I wanted people to look at me like I mattered. That want, that specific, burning, never quite satisfied hunger quietly organized 40 years of my life. And by the time I understood what it was really costing me, the bill was already enormous. My name is Philip. I am 80 years old. I grew up as the youngest of 4 brothers in a family where attention was scarce and respect was something you earned through performance. My father was not a cruel man, but he was a man who noticed achievement and was largely silent about everything else. You got an A, he noticed. You won something, he noticed. You came in second, he was kind about it, but it was the winning that made his eyes light up. And I spent my entire childhood trying to make his eyes light up. And then I spent my entire adulthood doing the same thing with different people, in different contexts, with professional recognition standing in for my father's approval without fully understanding that's what I was doing, until I was about 65 years old. I want to ask you something honest. When you imagine the life you are working toward, the successful version of your life, how much of it involves other people's responses? How much of the satisfaction you are imagining comes from the doing of the thing, from the actual experience of building or creating or contributing, and how much comes from the way people respond to you when you have done it? If you are completely honest, if you really examine the fantasy, how much of it is about being seen, about walking into a room and being recognized, being consulted, being treated with a specific quality of deference that tells you you matter. You have arrived. You are someone who counts. I am not judging that want. It is deeply human. Every person on earth wants to feel like they matter, but there is a difference between wanting to feel that you matter and organizing your entire life around making other people confirm it. The first is a need. Healthy, legitimate, worth attending to. The second is a trap, and it is a trap I spent 40 years in. Let me tell you about a moment that contains everything I am trying to explain. I was 53 years old. I had just been named division president of the company I had worked at for 20 years. A significant promotion, the kind that changes your title, your office, your salary, and the way people treat you in hallways. The day the announcement was made, I received 47 congratulatory messages. I remember the number because I counted them. Not because I am unusual, because I was hungry enough that I counted. The feeling that came with those messages, with that specific, concentrated wave of recognition, was the closest thing to what I had been chasing my whole life. For about 3 days, and then it faded. The messages stopped. People went back to their normal behaviors. The deference that came with the new title settled into something routine rather than something new. And the hunger returned. Not as acute as before, but there. Asking for the next thing. Now, I understand that this is the mechanism I described earlier, the finish line moving, the appetite recalibrating after each feeding. But I want to tell you something specific about the hunger for respect that makes it different from other forms of ambition. The hunger for respect, for the specific feeling of being seen as significant by other people, is uniquely vulnerable to what other people actually think, which means it is always outside your control. You can work harder and earn more money regardless of what anyone thinks of you. The number in the account is real regardless of whether anyone approves. But you cannot make people respect you. You can perform things that typically earn respect, but the respect itself lives in other people's minds, and other people's minds are not yours to manage, and so the hunger for respect produces a specific kind of anxiety that other ambitions do not, a constant background monitoring of how you are being perceived, a hypervigilance to signs of approval or disapproval, a sensitivity to criticism that is out of proportion to the actual content of the criticism, because every criticism is felt not just as feedback, but as evidence about your fundamental worth. I lived in that anxiety for 40 years, not always consciously, but it was there, running in the background, coloring every interaction. I was perpetually asking a question that I never quite articulated, but that was always present. How am I being seen? And there is a cost to living with that question constantly running. The cost is presence. You cannot be fully present in a moment when part of you is always monitoring how the moment looks. You cannot be fully in a conversation when part of you is always evaluating how you are coming across. You cannot be fully yourself in any situation when part of you is always managing your impression. The monitoring takes up space, the space where genuine experience lives. For 40 years, I was never fully in my own life. I was always partly outside it, watching, evaluating, managing the impression. I want to talk about where the hunger for respect actually comes from, because I think understanding the root is the only way to do anything meaningful about it. In my case, and I believe this is more common than most people acknowledge, the hunger for external respect was a substitute for something I had not given myself. Self-respect, not confidence in my abilities. I had plenty of that. I am talking about something deeper, the basic foundational sense that I was worthwhile as a person regardless of what I achieved or what anyone thought of me. That sense, that unconditional, non-performance-based sense of my own worth, was the thing I had never quite developed, because the environment I grew up in had not given me the conditions to develop it. Worth in my family was conditional. It was earned through achievement. And a child who learns that their worth is conditional learns to spend their life earning it. The workplace was just the arena where I moved that earning. My father's eyes became the room's response. The conditions changed. The dynamic was identical. And here is the important thing. No amount of external respect can fill the gap that self-respect leaves when it is missing. Because external respect, however abundant, is always conditional and always temporary. It requires maintenance. It requires continued performance. It can be withdrawn. It lives in other people's minds, and other people are entitled to change their minds. Self-respect, the genuine, unconditional kind, cannot be given to you by anyone else. It cannot be earned through achievement. It cannot be acquired through other people's approval, no matter how much of it you accumulate. It is something you have to construct from the inside, through honesty, through self-knowledge, through the willingness to be with yourself clearly and decide I am worthwhile, not because of what I have achieved, but because I exist and I am trying. That construction is slow. It requires help, often. It is not the work of a single insight or a single conversation, but it is the only work that actually addresses the hunger. Everything else just feeds it. I want to tell you about my father. He died when I was 38. We had a decent relationship by then, warm, if not deep. He had softened somewhat with age, and I had achieved enough that the approval came more readily. But there was a conversation we never had. I never told him, never was able to tell him, never found the right moment or the right words, that what I had needed from him all along was not his recognition of my achievements. It was his recognition of me, the person, independent of the performance. I needed him to see me and tell me I was enough just by being there, not because I had won something, just because I was his son and I was there. He never said that. I don't know if he knew how. I don't know if he had ever received it himself. He died not knowing that what I had needed from him was something much simpler than what I had been working so hard to earn. And I spent the next 40 years looking for it in boardrooms and promotions and 47 congratulatory messages. It was never there, because the thing I was looking for was never an external thing. It was the thing my father should have given me and couldn't. And the thing I had to learn eventually to give myself. At 65 years old, with the help of a therapist who was more patient than I deserved, I started learning to give it to myself. It is the most important work I have done, and it had nothing to do with respect. I want to ask you to do something that may feel strange. For the next week, I want you to notice, just notice, without judgment, how often you are monitoring your impression. How often you check your phone looking for responses to something you posted. How often you modify what you say based on how you think it will be received. How often you make a decision based partly on how it will look rather than what you actually want. You don't have to change anything yet. Just notice, because the monitoring happens below the level of conscious choice for most people. It is so habitual, so automatic, so thoroughly integrated into how they move through the world that they have stopped seeing it. Noticing it is the first step. And once you can see it, once you can feel the monitoring happening, feel the hunger underneath it, you can start asking the real question: what am I actually trying to feel? And what would it take to feel it from the inside instead of the outside? That question is worth a lifetime of investigation. But it is much better to begin the investigation at 30 than to arrive at it at 65. Tell me in the comments, what is your version of the hunger? Not necessarily respect, maybe approval, maybe admiration, maybe belonging. What is the specific thing you are most hungry for other people to give you? And when did you first start needing it? Because the answer to the second question usually contains everything you need to know about the first.